Welcome everyone to an exciting Chabura Shiur. We're delighted to partner once again with the American Sephardi Federation for a special two-part public series on Ḥakham Uziel's Hegyonei Uziel. The American Sephardi Federation documents, preserves, and celebrates Sephardic Jewish heritage through rigorous scholarship, vibrant cultural programming, and intercommunal collaboration. Having collaborated with the ASF in the past, we're thrilled to join forces with them once more. Leading this exploration, his first appearance at the Chabura is Dr. Aryeh Tepper. About our speaker, Dr. Tepper serves as Director of Publications at the American Sephardi Federation and is a Fellow at Ben Gurion University and the Center for American Culture and Ideas. He co-directs the Omni American Future Project, writes widely on classical Sephardi Judaism, and is the author of Progressive Minds, Conservative Politics, Leo Strauss's later writings on Maimonides. I'm very excited for this series. And before we begin, if you have not yet, make sure to grab yourself a copy of our Chabura Shavuot book, which is now available on our website and on Amazon, just in time for the Moed. The Sefer, published through our publishing house Da'at Press, is part of our Festive Moedim series, which is a special lineup of Moed-themed learning you won't want to miss. And finally, this shiur and series is dedicated Leilui Nishmat Rivka Bat Pesach, the beloved grandmother of one of our dear Chabura members. May her neshama have an aliyah, and may her family be granted full nechama. Thank you everyone for being here live. All those who will be listening afterwards. Thank you so much, Dr. Aryeh Tepper, for being with us. It's an honor, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ohad. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the Chabura for this invitation and for this opportunity. I should thank Avi. Avi Garson's not with us, but I should thank Avi as well, because he really was instrumental in making this happen. And Jason Guberman as well, the executive director of the American Sephardi Federation. And thank you to all of you for being here. It's really a pleasure to be here. During our two sessions, we will explore the introduction and the first section of Ḥakham Uziel, Rav Uziel's two-volume work, Hegyonei Uziel. I'm not talking to eternity here, I'm talking to you, everyone here in the audience. So maybe if we can just take 1 minute, I'd like to know if any of you has experience, if you've read any of Rav Uziel's work, or if you've in some context become familiar with been made familiar with Rav Uziel's work, or if it's just this is new territory for you. So feel free to volunteer if anyone has. If you've read, has anyone here read Rav Uziel before? Okay, Simon has. Okay, Simon, what and Arevot, okay, has as well. What Simon, and so feel free, Simon and Arevot, what are you familiar with? What have you seen? Feel free to unmute and share.
I've read parts of Hegyonei Uziel, and I translated parts of it into English as well. And I have the collection on Shabbat and Moed.
The two-volume, great.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
And some of the Teshuvot as well.
Okay. Hatzeba.
More or less the same. We are a couple. I know some of his teshuvot about election for women,
right?
And some of his תורת החירות שלו, through his drashot that he made before Chagim, Atzmaut, Pesach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And probably maybe Giyur conversion, right? Okay. Okay, and so the rest of you, I guess this is really new territory. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of reading, because I want you to finish these sessions with an appreciation of Rav Uziel's genius. I don't say that lightly, and I think I do think he was a genius. And in order to do that, however, we're going to have to dive into the text. But I want to balance things out. And I know this is all new, so we'll try to make this work. My request from you is as we're going along, feel free to ask questions of clarification if I'm saying something that's not clear. If something, or if you have a particular interest, I am the maestro of the discussion. So if I think we'll have to wait for later, I'll ask you politely, okay, that's a great question. We'll deal with that later. If it fits in with the flow, we'll fit it in with the flow and we'll be good to go. Okay. And by the time we're done, I hope to demonstrate that within the flow of Rav Uziel's simultaneously rich and subtle prose in Hegyonei Uziel, that Rav Uziel offers a life-giving Torah for a Jew who aspires to serve Hashem in all of his or her ways. And this largely overlooked work is pulsating with life, Torah Chaim, and it deserves our attention. I'm incredibly excited to be presenting this material. I spent 10 years reading the Guide for the Perplexed, and I finally sat down and wrote a long work on the guide. And it's been approximately 10 years since I began reading Hegyonei Uziel. I'm going to share with you, so you get an appreciation of how excited I am to do this. These are what my pages of Hegyonei Uziel look like. Right? I could show you a page. The binding has come apart. I had to get it rebound and stapled. These are staples over here. And I've gone through and charted leading terms, and it's really been for me a source of life. I need to thank Rabbi Daniel Buskila of the Sephardi Educational Center, who introduced me first to Rav Uziel. And in my quest to find a deeply rooted and committed, but simultaneously cosmopolitan Judaism, I've been reading it for these past 10 years for the sake of life, which was Rav Uziel's intention, I believe. And Hegyonei Uziel is less a book of Jewish thought. It's usually called a book of Jewish thought, but it's less a book of Jewish thought than a devotional work, Sefer Avodah, that is deeply grounded in Jewish thought. And in this respect, if some of you are familiar with the book Chovot HaLevavot, The Duties of the Heart, it bears a certain resemblance to Chovot HaLevavot. And I don't think it's accidental that the first text that he brings in Hegyonei Uziel is Chovot HaLevavot, but we will get there. Before we dive into the work, I will provide a background regarding Rav Uziel, and then I'll introduce the main themes and trajectory of Hegyonei Uziel as a whole, and then sketch the arc of our two-session journey, and we will dive into the text. Okay, so I'm going to open up the PowerPoint, and I will share it with you. Okay, everyone can see that?
We can see it, yes.
Okay, this is Ḥakham Uziel. Ben Sion, there we go. Mayor Hai Uziel was born on the 23rd of May, 1880, in Ottoman Jerusalem, died on the 4th of September, 1953, in the independent state of Israel. He lived through three different regimes, the Ottomans, the British, and the Israeli. He's descended from Spanish Jews on both sides, and a long lines of illustrious Ḥakhamim and Rabbanim. On his father's side, he was the grandson of Rav Yitzchak Chaim, one of the most important Dayanim of Yerushalayim, and the son of Rav Yosef Raphael Uziel, Nasi Beit Din Rabbani, Shel HaKehila Sfaradit, the head of the Beit Din Rabbani of the Sephardic community in Jerusalem. On his mother's side as well. But before, I don't want to weigh you down with all of the names and impressive, names. And the important thing I think to understand is that it takes a community to produce greatness. We meet with outstanding figures in all fields who grew up in a familial or communal environment that facilitated their greatness. So how many of y'all know Steph Curry? Have you ever heard of Steph Curry? Yeah, Steph Curry from the Golden State Warriors. Steph Curry is arguably the greatest shooting guard of the past generation. His father was a guard in the National Basketball Association, right? The Mannings, I may have to use a different metaphor. The Mannings in football, maybe there's Mannings who are quarterbacks, prominent quarterbacks in the National Football League in the United States. Their father was a quarterback. The Marsalis musicians, Wynton Marsalis and Jason and Delfio, they came from a couple of generations of musicians in New Orleans. And all of you, I'm sure, can bring different examples. It's the same principle when it comes to scholarship, a way of life. With someone on their own, if they decide to dive into the world of Torah, might take 40 years to find the material and to have the conversation that illuminates a world for them. If you're growing up surrounded by it, you're 10 years old and your father's having a conversation with Yisa Bracha, the great Rishon LeZion in Eretz Yisrael, you absorb things very early and very clearly. And Rav Uziel came from this environment. His father, Rav Uziel's father, Rav Yosef Raphael Uziel, was a Baal Chesed. Rav Uziel grew up with Yetomim, orphans in his home, and also Adam Takif, a very strong personality. Here's a story they tell about Rav Uziel's father. And this is a different Jerusalem. The conditions of life were far more difficult. What was acceptable and not acceptable, obviously, within the public sphere was different. But I bring you this example just to give you a portrait of the person who raised Rav Uziel consciously to be a leader in the Jewish community. His father directed him towards this end. So there's a story that is told by Ziknei Yerushalayim, the elders of Yerushalayim, that Rav Yosef Raphael Uziel, on the 10th of Tevet, Asar B'Tevet, on the fast day, a day when you fast from sunrise to sunset, that there was a gentleman drinking coffee. So Rav Yosef Raphael took his walking stick and smashed the mug, which then broke into 1,000 pieces on the ground. This is in the old city of Jerusalem. And then Rav Yosef Raphael, after he, with his walking stick, breaks the mug, gives him the money, the value of the cup, and says to him, look, I'm going to assume that a doctor told you that you can drink coffee, but next time just do it inside. So there's a kind of shleimut in covering and seeing the public, what's necessary for the public sphere, take into consideration the money of the individual and not coming to any harsh judgment about him, that you see in this particular ma'aseh. There are many other ma'asim that they are told of Yosef Raphael, including, as I mentioned, his chesed and his kindness, loving kindness, and bringing orphans into his home. This is the person who had a great influence on Rav Uziel. Rav Uziel's mother, Sarah, was the granddaughter and great-granddaughter of what's called the Rishon LeZion, the leading Sephardi rabbinic figures in the land of Israel and in the Ottoman Empire, including one figure who was a proto-Zionist, Rav Chaim David Hazan, who was one of the first to live in Mishkanot Sha'ananim, which is across from Har Zion, where you have one of the first neighborhoods that was built. He purchased land there and lived there, and he supported already in the 1860s agricultural development in the land of Israel. So Rav Uziel also comes from a native, we'll call it a native Zionism in the land of Israel, from a long line of figures that he imbibed, and then his Zionism, his religious Zionism was a natural outgrowth of this. Rav Uziel's first wife, Rosa, who died relatively young, was the granddaughter of the Rishon LeZion, Yisa Bracha, of Yaakov Shaul El Yashar, with whom Rav Uziel was close. At age 12, Rav Uziel begins learning at Tiferet Yerushalayim, the worldly and open-minded educational institution in Sephardi Ottoman Jerusalem that taught Limudei Kodesh, religious subjects, together with history, sciences, and languages. So Rav Uziel was fluent in 5 languages: Hebrew, Arabic, Turkish, Ladino, and French. It was a robustly Jewish, modern, and cosmopolitan education, and this is something to think about, but not a Western secular cosmopolitanism, a Middle Eastern Sephardi cosmopolitanism. Rav Uziel was orphaned at age 14 from his father, and he went to support his family. And he writes about those years, that period, as follows. This is an introduction to his first volume of his collection of halachic writings, Mishpatei Uziel. Yemei shalvati v'oshri hayu k'tzarim. The days of my not peace, but the days of my peace and happiness were few. Ve'egi l'shnat habagrut yad Hashem ha'ayta bi b'hilakech mimeni avi u'magini. When I became mature at the age of Yad Hashem, Yud Dalet is a hint here. His father died when he was 14, but Yad Hashem Ha'ita Bi, the Kodesh Baruch Hu took from me, my father and defender. Az amati lenafshi avadati. I felt that I said to my soul that I'm lost. K'ma ya'aseh now? What will a young person do? Ka'arer ba'arava. A lone tree, or someone who does not have lost his inheritance. Ba'arava. Limtso darko b'hayim, to find his way in the world. Ulam hasdei Hashem aveh hayitumim, the chesed of God, the father of orphans. Gavra alai. Ve'ali hayom la'avodah ve'alala le'iyun. And I worked during the day and I learned at night. So beginning at age 14, without his father and defender, he became responsible for taking care of his family. We have first person reports of he became prematurely, and this was not uncommon in those times, but he became prematurely very mature and directed and devoted, and he didn't waste a moment of his time, if possible. This is also a theme that appears in Hegyonei Uziel. Rav Uziel writes in a number of different contexts about the importance of utilizing every moment, and he became a great person while dealing with a very difficult situation. At age 20, Rav Uziel began teaching at that same yeshiva Tiferet Yerushalayim. And at age 31, in 1911, he was appointed the Ḥakham Bashi of Yafo, the chief Sephardi rabbi of Jaffa, alongside Rav Kook, the great Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Kook. Now, his address, Rav Uziel's address, this is a number of years after. I think this picture is from the late 20s or early 30s. But in 1911, when he was given the position, he offered an address, which is a fascinating and important document because of the manner in which he describes the division of labor between himself and Rav Kook. And in the drasha, he describes two aspects to the Nisiut Yisraelit Ruchanit, to the spiritual leadership of the nation of Israel. Two aspects that has assumed different but consistent forms across Jewish history: the Mehokek and Shevet MiYehuda, which is parallel to the priestly function of the spiritual leadership and the kingly function of spiritual leadership. The Mehokek, the priestly function, is the spiritual power whose focus is inward, attending to the soul, while the focus of Shevet MiYehuda is outward, is responsible for peace at home and engaging with the world at large. And he explicitly offered, Rav Kook, you will be the Mehokek, and I will be the Shevet MiYehuda. And already we begin to get a sense of Rav Uziel's rooted cosmopolitanism. This term that I'm using, rooted cosmopolitanism, comes from a professor of philosophy at Harvard University, Anthony Appiah. And I think this is the term that's appropriate for distinguishing classical Sephardic Judaism from modern Orthodoxy, or from other forms of Torah in Derech Eretz, because it's not a view which sees the relationship to the world of being balanced. Rather, it's an organic view which begins with deep rootedness that then facilitates expansion and full participation in life. It's a worldly orientation that engages with all aspects of life, an active life, inspired and deeply informed by Judaism. Of course, this vision for the division of labor within the Israeli rabbinut was not realized, but it is a faithful portrait of how Rav Uziel lived his life. And it's helpful for understanding the orientation of Hegyonei Uziel. As I previously noted, Hegyonei Uziel is less a book of Jewish thought than Jewish thought for the sake of life, a devotional book that directs us in transforming all of life into Avodat Hashem. And as we'll see, I'm going to skip ahead for a second, as we'll see when we get there, Rav Uziel published the first volume of Hegyonei Uziel when he was 70. He didn't write the book to get a gig. He didn't write the book to set himself up in relationship to other thinkers. He wrote the book after an active life, deeply informed by Jewish thought in all of its aspects, reflecting upon that kind of life. In 1919, Rav Uziel was appointed the head of the Mizrahi movement, which was a religious Zionist movement that raised the flag of integrating Torah and work and participating in the different institutions and all the aspects of the life of the state. He spent much of World War I in Damascus, Syria, and from 1921 to 23 replaced Rabbi Yaakov Meir in Saloniki. Rabbi Meir was then appointed to the position of the Ḥakham Bashi, the Rishon LeZion. Apparently, it was a struggle to convince Rav Uziel to take the position, and we have a letter to Rav Yaakov Meir. This is what Rav Uziel wrote to Rabbi Meir when he accepted the position, and it's really an amazing document in terms of revealing his self-understanding. Says Rav Uziel, "Ani maskim, okay, I agree to take this position, because my view of my own life is the following. The view of my private existence is the following. Ani ben ha'am v'chai lema'ano. I'm the son of this nation and live for it. Ani hai kadei lahakriv et kochot nafshi likidmat hatzlachato. I live for the sake of sacrificing all the powers of my soul to advance its success. Hinani la'am hazeh l'chaim u'lamavet. I'm here for this people, whether it be life or in death. Ba'aretz v'chutz la'aretz, in the land of Israel or outside the land of Israel. Hineni b'chol makom Hashem metziuti v'avoti tiyeh nechotza me'ula. I will be at any place that my existence and my work will be necessary and beneficial." So in 1923, Rav Uziel goes back to Tel Aviv after serving as the chief rabbi of Saloniki, where he was appointed the Rav Rashi HaSfaradi. In 1935, the first volume of Mishpotei Uziel is published, his halachic writing. In 1940, he founded his own yeshiva, Yeshivat Sha'arei Tzion. He served Rav Uziel as the Sephardi chief rabbi of the yeshuv from 1939 to 1948, and then the chief Sephardi rabbi of the state of Israel from 48 to 53. The two volumes of Hegyonei Uziel were originally published in 1953-54 at the end of an incredibly active life. As I noted, Rav Uziel did not publish Hegyonei Uziel to get a gig. He published it at the end of his life. And as articulated in his 1911 Drasha, upon being appointed the Ḥakham Bashi of Yafo, an active life deeply informed by Jewish thought. Rav Uziel, over the course of his life, undertook missions on behalf of the Zionist movement from Iraq to the United States, participated as a delegate at Zionist congresses, represented the yeshuv before the Ottoman and British authorities. He was a judge, Posek, the president of Porat Yosef Yeshiva, and his own yeshiva, and as anyone who can tell you who has read his works, prodigiously learned, a range, with a mastery of a range of texts that you just do not find today. And it's clear that he has imbibed and deeply assimilated what he has learned. But the purpose of Hegyonei Uziel, which we're going to segue over to Hegyonei Uziel. The purpose of Hegyonei Uziel is not to order our world of beliefs and opinions, or to explore a theoretical understanding of Judaism or divinity. The book was a work of reflection, written by a great scholar who was also a great doer, whose Talmud led to Ma'aseh, whose learning led to action, a book of direction to living a heroic Jewish life. Okay. So what does Rav Uziel do in Hegyonei Uziel? He places the human soul, note, the human soul, which is one. He doesn't have a vision of a Jewish soul being different from a non-Jewish soul. The soul of humanity is shared by all human beings. He places the human soul and the soul's connection to God as the ultimate object of Jewish study, the Pardes, the enchanted garden of contemplation. But it is contemplation for the sake of action. He delineates the contours of the soul and the ways in which the soul's power is either augmented or diminished. For Rav Uziel, every human being is judged according to the degree that his or her actions augment the power of the soul or diminish it. In Rav Uziel's view, the Torah was given for this purpose, to augment the power of the soul. So too were Yisurim, suffering. At the peak of the first section of Hegyonei Uziel, Rav Uziel turns suffering into strength. For Rav Uziel, not only the individual soul, but the soul of a nation grows over time according to its spiritual nourishment and according to its Yisurim. And the soul of the Jewish people has grown strong thanks to its history and the spiritual discipline of the Torah. Ideally, the soul flows from God through us, augmented and made stronger and manifesting itself in what Rav Uziel calls our teudah, a term that in modern Hebrew today means certificate or diploma, but in Rav Uziel's time referred to a goal or a mission. We say today Yehud. Rav Uziel believed that the relegation of Judaism to the Beit Knesset and the Bet Midrash was the equivalent of putting Judaism into a gnizah, or worse, burying it. The return, design, and the restoration of political sovereignty has enabled the full expression of our teudah, of our goal or mission, which is, and now I quote from Hegyonei Uziel, the exalted aspiration to elevate humanity to the highest elevation, to the highest level of human perfection. A plurality of powers is embraced in this perfection. Again, quote, scientific and artistic, economic and aesthetic, all undertaken l'shem shamayim. But we only have 2 sessions, and I see we're already halfway done with the first session. I have to make a confession. When I first planned these 2 learning sessions, I had in mind that they're 90 minutes each. So I'm saying I'm going to have to rearrange here. By the way, at this point, let me stop for a second. Does anyone have any thoughts? Because I know I've kind of run through this biography and given this overview of Hegyonei Uziel. Does anyone at this point have any thoughts or any questions before we dive back into the material? And please don't. Yes, Robert.
I'm just puzzled why he only spent 2 years in Salonika. It seemed a very short period of time. Did he feel that he could do better work in Tel Aviv? Do you have any information to suggest why he
cut
was
short.
a short stint?
There's an article about it in a collection that was published in 2020, and he cut short his time because he wanted to come back and participate in. They had to persuade him to go in the first place. That was the, and then I think my impression is, and I say this with a moderate degree of confidence, My impression is that he thought that he had done all he can do, and he wanted to get back to the land of Israel. He wanted to encourage the Jews, and don't forget now, Salonika at this time, we're dealing. The Great Fire was in 1917. The community had been decimated, and he thought that he was trying to encourage the community to make Aliyah to the land of Israel, to build Zionist institutions. So even when he was there, his focus was on the land of Israel. If you're interested, do you read Hebrew?
So
Okay, I can try to find some material if something of particular.
it is of interest. It is of interest.
Okay, I'll do that. Any other questions? Thoughts? Okay. So we have 2 sessions, and during these 2 sessions, we're going to see the tip of the iceberg. We'll explore the introduction and the first section of Hegyonei Uziel. Actually, we might only do the introduction. And this is the primary section in which Rav Uziel introduces and extends the theme of the soul and the ways in which the soul grows stronger. However, while he points in the direction of the idea of the Teudah, we won't treat it, he doesn't treat it in this section, and we won't get to it. But before we dive in, I want to say a word about how we'll read Hegyonei Uziel and how he is usually written about by scholars. Hegyonei Uziel is largely ignored in rabbinic circles. Much of the reason is because Jewish thought really doesn't have today in many rabbinic circles isn't given much weight. There is an exception, which is Rabbi Mark Angel's book, which perhaps you're familiar with. Loving Truth and Peace, the Grand Religious Worldview of Rabbi Ben Zion Uziel. It's an excellent introduction. You do find people writing about Rabbi Uziel's thought in academia, but what you usually find there is an ordered analysis of Rabbi Uziel's views on a certain subject, and then a comparison of his views with other religious Zionist thinkers. Such studies can be helpful, but they miss the literary dimension of Hegyonei Uziel. You can offer classes on Rabbi Uziel's views on Zionism, his views on women's right to vote, on the purpose of the Torah, on conversion. However, I'd like to do something more visceral, which is to give you a sense of the sophistication of his writing. And I think really the depths are we only touch the depths if we do the work in reading him together. So our exploration of Hegyonei Uziel will follow Rav Uziel's literary lead. And part of my argument is that we have not even begun to appreciate Rav Uziel's literary sophistication. And I hope to demonstrate that for you. And we're going to dive into the text now. But before we do that, just a little, as we say, picanti, so you can take a couple of pictures here, see a few photos here. This is Rav Uziel in 1927, mission to Iraq. Over here is the grandfather. This is Rabbi Ezra Dan-Gur, who was the grandfather, or the great-grandfather of, what would it be? David Dan-Gur at the American Sephardi Federation. This is in 1917 when Allenby arrived in Jerusalem when the British defeated the Turks and the British the British occupied the land of Israel. And here's a 31-year-old, 1917, 1 second. So this is a 38-year-old, 37-year-old, right? 1 second. Yeah, 37-year-old Rav Uziel, or a young Rabbi Uziel. And here again is Rav Uziel and Rav Kook. Okay, so let's dive into the text. We are looking now at the introduction to Hegyonei Uziel. In the introduction to Hegyonei Uziel, Rav Uziel says that the original plan was to publish some of his writings on Jewish thought. The original plan was advanced in 1920, 1930, when he was 50. He explained later in the introduction that the plan was not realized because the initiative ran out of money, and his father's cousin, 30 years younger, who his father had adopted and brought into their home, Rav Yitzchak Badahav reprimanded Rav Uziel for not concentrating on publishing his halachic writing. So Rav Uziel says he then waited for a fitting time, which is now. In the introduction, it says that time is now. After the miraculous founding of the state of Israel, the time has come. In the introduction, at the beginning of his introduction, Rav Uziel notes that when it comes to publishing a work of thought for the public, there is great responsibility to thoroughly weigh the content and the style of the work. We thus begin by trusting that Rav Uziel has invested 1, the time, and 2, the thought and the organization in writing of his work, and we should honor his time and thought by reading his work closely. And while we don't have the time to read his work at the slow pace that it deserves, we can highlight some points and follow the trajectory of his thought and slowly read select passages. Rav Uziel slowly reveals his meaning and intention. It is not obvious from the beginning. We won't impose clarity upon the text, but will let ourselves become fruitfully perplexed before letting the clarity naturally emerge. Rav Uziel is an extremely subtle writer. Now, the first text that Rav Uziel cites in Hegyonei Uziel is from the introduction to Chovot HaLevavot, the duties of the heart, the devotional work written in 10th, 11th century Spain by Bahaye ibn Pakuda. Let me shift over to, one moment. Here we go. With a translation. So this is the first text that he cites in his introduction to Hegyonei Uziel. And he says when he brings the text, the way he says it, the justification for bringing the text is Bo b'perek, at the same time that he decided the time has come to actually get down and write, Alu b'machshavti divrei hadayan hasid Rabbeinu B'Haye. The words of the judge, the dayan, and the pious judge, our teacher, Rabbeinu B'Haye Sfaradi, this is what came to mind. That's how he presents it. So what is the text that he brings? It begins as follows, and I'm just going to go straight. I'm going to go straight to the English, but I'm going to point out some important Hebrew terms that we need to keep in mind. Of this being knowledge of God's oneness, Yehud Hashem, the believer is not permitted by our religion to remain in ignorance, for the Torah exhorts us, saying, therefore know this day and consider it within your heart that the Lord is God in heaven and above and on earth below. Okay, the main term here is v'hashivot el levavecha, the heart. Okay? Rabbeinu B'Haye continues. V'chen, shah mitzvot halevavot, the same as the case for other commandments of the heart, which we have mentioned already or will mention. The faith of the believer will not be complete unless he knows these duties and practices them. They are the inner science. Okay, so we previously referred to the heart, and now he uses the phrase chokhmah hatzfuna, the hidden wisdom, which is translated here, inner science. The wisdom within, our internality. Asher hi o halevavot, which is the light of our hearts, v'noga hanifashot, and the shining of the souls. So what do we have here? We have heart, we have inner wisdom, hidden wisdom, we have soul. And Rabbeinu B'Haye continues in this passage, and he uses these terms synonymously. A number of terms that with different emphases and with different colorings point to internality. In this context, he mentions the following. Va'amru, they said about a sage who would pass the first day in the company of other people, but when he was alone, he would call out, "Oh, bring me the hidden light," refer to the duties of the heart. Can we have the hidden light, duties of the heart? By the way, an interesting footnote, if anyone is interested in the dialogue between Judaism and Sufism, Rabbeinu Bahaye, this book itself is engaged in deep dialogue with Sufism, and most of the time when he brings an anonymous sage and he doesn't give the source, he's bringing from a Sufi text. One of the wise men was consulted regarding a strange case on the laws of divorce. So the sage replied to the inquirer, "You're asking about something which it won't harm you if you don't know this. Do you already know that you are under duty to know? Do you already know all that you are bound to know regarding the commandments that you're not allowed to neglect and that you shouldn't neglect?" And he's talking now, referring this sage that Rabbeinu Bahaye in Chovot Levavot, Duties of the Heart, which Rav Uziel is quoting, the first text in Chovot of Hegyonei Uziel. Have you spent enough time developing your inner world and investing in your soul that you're now looking at this halachic legal question? Who knows if it'll ever occur, when your main work in this life is to invest in perfecting your soul? And Rabbeinu Bahaye continues along these lines, bringing a number of synonymous phrases and verses, all emphasizing the importance of internality. Okay. So that's the first text that Rav Uziel brings in Hegyonei Uziel. The second text, he follows by saying the following. Let's go and learn from the words of our teacher, the Rambam. שהקדים בהלכותיו יסודות התורה ומצוותיה של התורה, who gave precedent in his legal work to the foundations of the Torah. And he begins quoting at this point, where it's written, "I maintain." "I maintain," writes the Rambam, "that it is not proper for a person to stroll in the paradise unless he has filled his belly with bread and meat. Bread and meat refer to the knowledge of what is permitted and forbidden, and similar matters concerning other mitzvot. Even though the sages referred to these as a small matter, for our sages said, a great matter, this refers to Maaseh Merkava, Maaseh, the work of the chariot, the Torah Tesod, the esoteric knowledge, which is the supreme knowledge. A small matter, this refers to the debates of Abaye and Rava. These are Amoraim from Bavel. These are sages of the Talmud who would argue about legal matters in the Talmud. Nevertheless, it is fitting for them to be given precedence. It is fitting to give preference to the legal small matters because they settle a person's mind. Also, they are the great good which the Holy One, blessed be He, has granted to allow stable living within the world. The English translation doesn't capture this, but it's the same term. It's a stable mind and a stable society. The same term is used. And the acquisition of the life of the world to come. Okay. So we have here two texts. We begin with Rabbeinu Bahaye and the emphasis on investing in the soul and the dispositions and the inner life, and establishing a hierarchy between that and legal knowledge. And then we segue into the Rambam, who says we need to give precedent precedence to legal knowledge, but this is a small matter relative to the ethereal, supernal matters of Jewish knowledge. Okay. At this point, and we're not going to see this inside, I'll narrate it from the outside. At this point, Rav Uziel says that, referring back to Maimonides, the Rambam, what he just wrote about the settled mind and achieving the great end, he says that is as the Ramban, Rav Nachmanides, the French scholar who lived roughly a century after the Rambam, wrote in Sha'ar Hagmul, which is an appendix to a book on a legal book on the laws of mourning, which is then a long essay dealing with the question of divine justice. And there he quotes the Ramban saying that the reason that we investigate God's ways in this world is that our obligation to serve God out of love and fear obligates us to investigate and to justify God's judgments so that we can have a settled mind and accept what happens to us. Again, a reference to the settled mind. So we note a theological thread, a terminological thread that connects the passages in the Ramban to the Ramban, the Rambam to the Ramban. By the way, there's in Jerusalem, in the Rehov HaRambam is next to Rehov HaRamban, right? The Rambam Street is next to Ramban Street. I always thought this was when I first came to Jerusalem, I thought this was the stupidest thing in the world until someone set me straight. He goes, think, if they put these two streets at opposite ends of the city, and how much people would get, at least this way, you're only getting one, you're getting lost by one block. That's, you just go over one. Okay. So we note a terminological thread connecting the passages in the Rambam and the Ramban, the settled mind, halachic knowledge, and knowledge of God's ways for the sake of accepting what happens to us, both settle the mind. And then Rav Uziel explicitly links these two thinkers. He weaves them together. From these two great lights, he says, we learn that halachic study comes first in time, per the Rambam, because learning halakha settles the mind and society, and only through them is it possible to achieve the world to come. For a person doesn't earn his world except through his intellectual perfection, knowing God to the degree that he can be known by knowing the ways of his judgments, so that, per the Ramban, we can settle our mind and serve God out of love and fear. And from the two of them together, says Rav Uziel, we learn that a man does not, a human being, does not fulfill his or her obligation via halachic knowledge. Rather, every person in Israel is obligated to diligently study and research and know God's ways in order to serve God out of fear and out of love. Now, this is all fine, but it does raise one issue. So let's go back. We began with Chovot HaLevavot, and it seemed that Rav Uziel was placing Chovot HaLevavot, duties of the heart, and the Rambam, which comes next, together in emphasizing the importance of supra-halachic knowledge. But Rav Uziel explicitly weaves the Rambam and the Ramban together. Now, this isn't a contradiction. I'm not sure if you want to call this a problem. However, it does not hold up. If you're saying this is a rigorously constructed work, this would seem to be, okay, we would expect a bit more clarity, clearer boundaries, clearer connections. And Rav Uziel emphasized that he wrote with great care. So I think that the metaphor would be, this is a wrinkle in the fabric, glitch in the matrix. And if we follow it, we'll see that it opens to understanding Rav Uziel's introduction on a deeper level. A new and beautiful structure will emerge. I see what's going. Can we go, Oad, can we go until, let's say, 35?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. I'm gonna try to wrap this point up together. It'll be good. It'll be a good place to stop at this point, and then next week I know where we can pick up. All right. Rav Uziel ends his overture of themes by quoting a text from the Ramchal of Moshe Chaim Luzzatto that emphasizes the fear of God as a kind of wisdom. And then he ties together the different parts of the opening of his introduction by introducing in the following two paragraphs, which are now on the screen, knowledge of the soul as the pinnacle of Jewish thought and life. And now we're going to read these two paragraphs. Okay. L'oram shel divrei rabotenu ele, and according to what we've just read, Baharti la'atzmi chibor sifri zeh shenikra Hegyonei Uziel. I decided to call this book Hegyonei Uziel, b'dvarim shem higeon alev, which are words which deal with the reasons of the heart, or the heart's reasoning. Lachkor, to research, v'ladat, and to know at nishmat Elokim, the divine soul, hashroya b'tuchenu, kaneh mehavhev v'malhiv, as a light that, a candle that waxes and shines brightly. Hame'irat darkenu, that illuminates our path. Kama'amar na'im zmirot Yisrael, according to the saying of the beautiful singer of Israel, Ner l'ragli dvarecha v'or l'netebotai. Your words are candles on my path, and a light for my paths, for my ways. V'ken amar Ḥakham be'adam, and so too said the wisest of all sages, Ner Hashem, God's candle, nishmat adam, is man's soul. Chofes kol hadrivat. Says Rav Uziel, Ner Hashem hadolek umeir ba'amkei nishmatenu hu haner hagalui v'ner b'chol derachenu. The divine candle, which is lit and illuminates the depths of our souls, is also the visible candle which is visible in our paths. Machshavtenu v'divorenu, in our thoughts and our words, b'finu v'aitenu, in our sayings and what we write. ובהיעדר אופנים מזה איננו כעיוור הממשש בצהריים שעיניו חשוכות וערובותיהם יקב לאור העין. And without this light, we're lost. Now, what I want to point out here is that, like Chovot HaLevavot, Rav Uziel is using a number of terms synonymously. The heart, internality, soul are all synonymous for the inner life. This is what the sages intended, says Rav Uziel. Know that God is pure and those who serve him are pure. The soul that has been placed in you, Torah, is pure. If you keep it pure, protect it pure, great. If you don't, however, I'm going to take it from you. Mikan, says Rav Uziel, Chovat kol adam, and the kol adam here is kol adam be'asher hu. This is all of humanity, every human being, the obligation of every human being. He is to know l'da'at ha'kesher shebein HaKadosh Baruch Hu and nishmat adam, to know the connection between the soul and the human soul and God. Shehi Torah v'tzicha l'shumra b'tara, which is pure, it needs to be kept pure. Ulam hegyonei lev amukim ehem meod, but these are very, very deep things. V'lo kol adam zocheh lahatzitz. Not every person is able to lahatzitz, to see. And this is a term that appears in many texts, Kabbalistic texts, mystical texts, as a kind of mystical viewing. Lo kol adam zocheh lahatzitz behem afilu derech hodo shel mahat. Afilu through the hodo shel mahat, through the pinnacle, there's a phrase in English which translates this, from the something of a pin, from the
Eye of the needle.
Thank you. Thank you. Hegyonei HaRambam. And then he brings the Rambam, who says that which keeps us from this knowledge is the Mechitza Gdolah, the great separation, which is matter. And then in the following paragraph, Uziel says something which he kind of pulls back the curtain. Hatiyul b'pardez ze. Tiyul b'pardez. Tiyul b'pardez is the phrase that is used for mystical, esoteric knowledge. Arba'a nichnasu b'pardez, the famous story of the four who entered the pardez. This is the language, tiyul b'pardez. So what is he talking about? What is the pardez here? Well, the pardez is the soul, the exploration of the soul. Now we can go back to the beginning of Hegyonei Uziel and see Sof Ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. If we read now Rav Uziel according to his own lights and his understanding that we have just learned, when he's bringing, how does he read Chovot Levavot? How does he read duties of the heart? When he's talking about, in all of these different, and we read previously, when he's talking about the importance of investigating and researching the knowing, the soul, right? The internality, the inner knowledge, the inner light, that is the tiyul b'pardez. That's the traveling through the enchanted garden. If we read that text as he now has delineated his understanding, when the Rabbeinu Bechaya is talking about the soul, that is the ultimate object of contemplation. Then now we can understand better why he brings the Rambam the way that he does. The first sentence that he brings from the Rambam begins, and he begins over here, and Rav Uziel begins his quote here, V'ani omer ein roe l'tayel bepardez. I maintain that it is not proper for a person to stroll in the pardez, because that's what he just introduced in the paragraph that preceded this, when he brings Rabbeinu Bechaya. And Rav Uziel, who knows what he's doing, he deletes the introduction. He does not bring this, which I just highlighted. What does he not bring when he's quoting the Rambam? The matters discussed in these 4 chapters concerning the 5 mitzvot are what the sages of the early generation termed the pardez. For the Rambam, this is physics and metaphysics. Rav Uziel doesn't bring that because that's not the pardez for him. So he says, I maintain it is not proper for a person to stroll in the pardez, because the pardez is what he introduced in Chovot Levavot at the very beginning of his introduction. So the way now we can see the structure of the introduction is he brings Rav Uziel, the Chovot Levavot, to introduce the theme of the soul, which he knows is the pardez, but he eases the reader into it. You have these connection with the terminal. It seems that we have a connection based upon the hierarchical ordering of halacha and thought, which is still there, but then he explicitly, Rav Uziel, connects the Rambam to the Ramban, which follows. And then as his introduction continues, he then, for those who are reading attentively and are putting things together, when he says Tiyul Atiyul b'pardez ze, now we know, okay, this is the soul. So I think this is a good place to stop and to set up what we'll do next week. And what I hope I've done just in this little, I hope this has been clear, first of all. It's very difficult to teach like this. It's very difficult to read a text together with people like this. But I hope this has been clear. And I hope that what you've seen is that the writing and the construction, while seemingly just sort of flowing, as I sat down to write my introduction, the following came to mind. After he said to you, I've thought of this, if you're writing about Jewish thought for the public, it's a great responsibility, and you need to weigh every word. And so he brings Baal Chavot Levavot, and you can read it one way, just sort of this reorganization of Jewish knowledge. But what he's doing is Rav Uziel is determining what is the Pardes. And the Pardes is the study of the human soul. That's his understanding. That's Rav Uziel standing on his own 2 feet. And as we see, as we continue in the introduction, which we'll do next time, we'll see how another dimension of his literary sophistication, and how basically he transforms with great sophistication and subtlety all of the Jewish tradition into building material for his spiritual palace, his unique view, which then next week will delineate some aspects of that view. And then we'll go through and see how the first section progresses and reaches a peak at the end of the first gate of Hegyonei Uziel.
Wow, thank you so much. That was a beautiful presentation.
Thank you,
And
Ḥakham.
we'll take a few minutes right now for questions, comments, harsh criticisms. Everyone is floor is open.
Everything is welcome. Everything is welcome in the Bet Midrash.
Exactly. So everyone can unmute or raise their hand right in the chat box. I'll start off with a question, if you can, not really a question, but if you can maybe expand a little bit more. You had a very interesting point on the distinction between a classical Sephardi approach towards Torah and the world, and how that differs from how it's seen today in the more modern Orthodox world with Torah Umada or things like that. And can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on the distinction?
Sure. I was thinking a little bit today about where does Rav Uziel's view come from. Part of it, and then I'll get to just the sort of the making the distinctions between the different paths. The Ḥakham Bashi, the leader of the Jewish community in the Ottoman Empire, was responsible for mediating between the authorities and the Jewish community, and also for maintaining Jewish education in the community. It was a very worldly position, which understood Jewish leadership in a worldly fashion, which demanded knowledge of languages, a knowledge of how to engage with, at that time, the Ottoman Empire. So when Rav Uziel is appointed to be the Ḥakham Bashi of Yafo next to Rav Kook, the way he's dividing up the work, it's a natural progression of the type of Torah that he has received, and the way his father was educating him, and the way his teachers educated him. It's a natural outgrowth of the way that the rabbinic leadership saw itself, the classic Sephardic leadership saw itself functioning in the Ottoman Empire. And I think we can draw parallels in other greater Sephardic communities as well. Judaism in the Ashkenazi sphere, in the European sphere, by and large, did not engage with the world in the same way. And in addition, the type of texts that were learned was far more restrictive. Rav Uziel has an essay where he discusses why did they continue to learn the guide for the perplexed in Sephardi yeshivot, but they didn't do that in the Ashkenazi world. So I think what you have is a tradition, an organic tradition that's fully engaged with life, that is deeply rooted in Jewish experience, passionately committed. I think this is the crucial point if we really want to continue with this path. And it can only work if the love is deep and the commitment is deep, as Rav Uziel wrote in his letter to Rav Yaakov Meir. Modern Orthodoxy, and this is a bit of punditry, maybe. I don't know if that's the best way to put it. Sociology, and this can all be argued. So anyone, feel free to argue. And like you said, harsh criticism is welcomed if it's to the point. Mevorach. But I think you do find when Ashkenazi Jewry comes to re-engage with the world, there's a world that I want to protect and there's a world that I want to engage, and we need to find the right balance. So then you find, Torah im derech eretz. Torah, in Germany, they had this, the slogan under Rav Hirsch was Torah and the way of the world. Or you have Rabbi Lamb, Torah umada. So you get these various balancing acts. And again, I'm not saying this to disparage. Wherever the light and strength comes from, Aryeh ze mishubach. But what you do have over here, the difference is, I think it's a more organic experience and view that so long as your roots are buried very deep in the earth, which means the passionate commitment to the people of Israel, to the land of Israel, to learning of the Torah of Israel, so long as that's strong. Did you all hear that bang? Did you all hear that sound? My windows, I live in Ofakim, 25 miles from the Gaza Strip, and my windows just shook from a bomb, I think that was just dropped in Gaza. So long as the roots are deep, then the tree to continue the metaphor, can grow and expand, and you can engage in all aspects of life on the level. And I guess this is the point where, in the classic Sephardi view, where do we engage with other human beings? Where do we want to engage with other human beings? And Rav Uziel talks about this, and I'm not, and we'll get to it next week. The terminology that I use, which is the most helpful, is on the level of human excellence. We can join with other human beings wherever human excellence is found, and it's consistent with the vision of in life, we all share with all human beings the same goal, which is to augment the power of the soul. I hope that's helpful. So the phrase that I find helpful to think about classic Sephardic Judaism in this respect is Professor Anthony Appiah's phrase, rooted cosmopolitan. I think that classical Sephardic Judaism is rooted cosmopolitan Judaism. You don't have to be afraid of being a cosmopolitan if you're deeply, deeply rooted.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So for the sake of time, I think we'll close it for tonight.
Right. I don't know if you don't have any questions, because everything was clear. Of course, or everything wasn't clear, so I'm trusting that everything was clear. And please, next time, thank you all very much for being here. Thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to seeing you next week. And if questions emerge in the meantime, Robert, I'm going to look for an article in English for you on Rav Uziel in Saloniki.
Thank you
So much.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you next week for the second installment. Laila tov.
Laila tov. Thank you.